Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Bookmark Theater. I'm your host, Bookmark. So last time we did 2 long episodes about a series that no one had ever heard of, so today we're going to be doing 1 long episode about a series that everybody's heard of. As before, it's character versus character, points going to the superior portrayal, and in the advent of a tie, story will decide the win. So, without further ado, let's talk about Sherlock Holmes.
Quite right, Watson, I don't. At least, not in the supernatural variety.
As the progenitor to all modern-day sleuths, Sherlock Holmes was created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle back in 1890 and tells the story of John Hamish Watson and Sherlock Holmes, an ex-military doctor and a consulting detective in Victorian London as they assist Scotland Yard in solving crimes. To say that the stories were successful is a bit of an understatement. The stories, as well as Sherlock Holmes the character, has become one of the most iconic pieces of literature in history. But what also is interesting about the Sherlock Holmes stories is that they are also in the public domain, meaning that if you would like to make your own versions of Sherlock Holmes, you may do so for free. It's also interesting to see how Sherlock has become the base model for most of modern crime solvers in both books and television. Shows like House, Case Closed, and Psych all harken back to the Sherlock model of an ultra-observant character able to make incredible deductions through just minute pieces of detail. So as there are about 1 sextillion different versions of Sherlock, this review will not be going up against all of them to see which is the best. However, I will be comparing the 2 that I believe are the best of the bunch. So, what will be our first candidate for comparison? No. No. You're kidding, right? Nope, it's the 2009 Guy Ritchie film, Sherlock Holmes.
Well, there isn't any time to waste then, is there?
While both a critical and box office hit, Sherlock Holmes did something with the formula that had never been done before, or at least not as well. They took Sherlock away from the calm Brit smoking a pipe and instead made him an action hero. This was shocking because most audiences had never seen this before. Some Sherlock productions had made him into more of a physical being, but this movie went further and made him into a full-force badass. This didn't have a bunch of deductions in boring rooms, this had deductions with explosions! And while many thought that this would detract from Conan Doyle's original concept, the film actually brought something new to the character and, in a lot of ways, made it better. So you may ask yourself what can compare to this revolutionary film. It's simple. You skip revolution and go straight to evolution. This is the 2011 BBC production, Sherlock. It's hard to think of something to do with the Sherlockian canon that hasn't already been done about 1,000 times. So this show's answer? Make it modern. Yeah, not the most original idea when adapting a classic, but here it's done flawlessly. It's written by Stephen Moffat, one of the greatest writers of the modern age, along with Mark Gatiss at the helm, as well as in the cast. And speaking of the cast, talk about star-studded. This is the show that launched Benedict Cumberbatch's career, really showed off Martin Freeman, and gave us the deliciously hammy Andrew Scott. With its 3-episode seasons at 90 minutes each, this show went from cult hit to international phenomena in a matter of months. So it's pretty clear, unlike the last 2 episodes, I love these 2 series to death. But I gotta choose one, so here is my answer to the question of who did it best, Sherlock versus Sherlock Holmes. Now let it be known that while we are examining these stories, there's going to be a ton of spoilers, and also there are 1,000 characters I would love to have put in this list, like Lestrade, Blackwood, Magnuson, Sebastian Moran, the taxi driver. I could go on and on. But there's only room for 6 on my SD card, so let's wait to take a bite of the big fish and start with a few minor characters. The first one being the wife of Watson herself, Miss Mary Morstan. When looked at side by side, it's actually kind of hilarious how similar these 2 versions are. In the original story, Mary Morstan was introduced to John Watson through a case, and their budding romance and subsequent relationship was also carried out between cases. However, in both versions, they're almost exactly the same. Mary is introduced at the end of Sherlock and John's time together. In the film, it happens after their final case, while in the show, it happens 2 years later after the fall of the Reichenbach, when Sherlock resurfaces. In the show, she's played by Amanda Abbington, who is also the real-life partner of Martin Freeman. What a coincidence. And given Moffat's track record for female characters, I knew this one was going to be good. The thing I love about Amanda's performance is that she's having a blast on the screen. Her intelligence really makes her an asset to the cast as well as the story. And not only that, she is able to not only keep up with Sherlock and John, but in a lot of ways she can pit them against one another. And if you're a longtime viewer of these shows, you know how hard that is to do. Also, if you're a longtime viewer of Stephen Moffat's writing, you'll know his penchant for overarching story plots that lead to a cinematic twist, which I won't ruin for all 3 of you that haven't seen it, but let me just tell you, it's good and it actually explains a lot. Kelly Reilly plays Mary in the film, and again, it's really surprising about how similar they are. Mary in this version is a governess who is introduced as her and John are about to get married, and also in this version, she is also a strong female character, but acting more as an observer, kind of an outsider looking into all the madness. And what's better, she doesn't feel out of place. Since John is a kind of recovering adrenaline junkie, it would kind of make sense that he would go for a girl like this. That being said, while Kelly is adorable and I love every single scene she's in, there just isn't enough of her to pull ahead. And since the show's version had her much more tightly ingrained in the plot, I have to give this one to her. Point goes to Sherlock. Speaking of femme fatales, how can you get better than an ex-opera singer turned blackmailing con artist? I don't know, but I'd certainly like to. This is Irene Adler. So this choice is really hard, as both versions play to the strengths of the original while bringing something new to the character. If you didn't know, Irene Adler was only ever in one Sherlock Holmes story, A Scandal in Bohemia, and to be honest, looking back at the original after seeing both of these, she wasn't that impressive. The original story is that she fell in love with the ruler of Bohemia, obtained a photograph of them together, and when the king chose to marry another, she uses the photograph to blackmail him. Sherlock is hired to get the photograph back, in which Irene beats him in a game of wits, gets married, and then throws the picture away. Kinda lackluster if you ask me. In the film, she's played by Rachel McAdams. Yeah, that blonde from Mean Girls. And it must be said, she's pretty damn great. Their interactions take place some years after A Scandal in Bohemia, allowing for far more development with Sherlock than we got in the book. And can we just agree that this is one of the best intro scenes ever? Everything about it, from the dialogue to Sherlock's paranoia to the subtle hints at their previous encounter, all of it is done just perfectly. In fact, most of the scenes involving Rachel McAdams are pretty awesome. Sure, a few of them run on for a little too long, but you do learn how much of a powerhouse this woman is, able to match Sherlock both mentally and physically. That, and we also get to see more of her emotional state here. She gets in deep with Moriarty, and you can tell she is terrified of him. And it shows you that she does really have feelings for Sherlock, making her worthy of our feelings as an audience. Her appearance in the second film is a little bit more than a glorified cameo, but it did bring across the same things, and also gave Sherlock more emotional stakes in bringing down Moriarty. In the show, she's played by Laura Pulver, and she is just a ton of fun in this version. Here, her and Sherlock meet in a retelling of A Scandal in Bohemia, where instead of a con woman, she's portrayed as a dominatrix. And you may think that the dominatrix thing is just a gimmick, something to get her to take her clothes off, but here it really makes sense, because she doesn't just challenge Sherlock on a physical level or a psychological level like what we've seen time and time before. She challenges Sherlock on something that none of his opponents have ever been able to challenge him on before, a level of sexuality. Laura does well in portraying Irene as a manipulator and a schemer, and you get so caught up in the fun she's having, you forget that in reality she's really quite a terrible person. That being said though, there is one thing that I think the show doesn't do enough that makes it fall behind the film. And that is the fact that in the show, Irene never wins. Which is kind of a glaring problem because the point of Irene's character is that she is the woman who beats Sherlock. In the show, Sherlock beats her at every turn. He cracks her safe, he decodes her message, he cracks her phone, and while it is true that decoding of the message, Moriarty wins, in the end, Sherlock still beats her. Fun fact, in a deleted scene in the Scandal in Belgrazia, there was a scene where Irene Adler basically leaves Sherlock naked on the streets of Karachi, but it was never filmed, so we don't count it. And for having the film reveal that in the end, Irene beats Sherlock, that definitely gets my vote. Point goes to Sherlock Holmes. Now let's talk about the smarter of the Holmes brothers. Talking about you, Mycroft, you fat bastard. I think you could tell this was going to be the comparison of 1,000 stars. While never taking the biggest role in the original stories, Mycroft Holmes was a kind of call to action / Sherlock 2.0. And in both portrayals, he's done by the masters. In the film, he's played by Stephen Fry, and oh my god, he is so Stephen Fry. Having only appeared in the second film, Mycroft in this version, it must be said, doesn't do very much. His placement here is basically as a tool to show the peculiarity that kind of runs in the family genes. And for the time he is on screen, he's mainly used for added comedic effect or to tighten up loosened plot threads. While on the show, he's played by Mark Gatiss. Yes, co-writer Mark Gatiss. And just like Stephen Fry, he is having the time of his life up there. Unlike Stephen, instead of playing him as a parallel to Sherlock, this Mycroft is his own special character. He too is deeply embedded in the workings of the British government, but given the secretiveness and shadowiness of the current UK government, Mycroft in turn is just as secretive and shady, if not more. Gatiss plays Mycroft more as a spy or a mob boss. In fact, in the first episode, they make it out as if he is Moriarty. What's even better is the sense of smug power that he admits. It's like he knows that he has power and he will use it. As to which is the better actor, I will say Stephen Fry takes the gold. But like Mary Morstan, there just isn't enough of him. Maybe if they gave him a bigger role in the second film, or hell, even added him into the first film, he may have pulled ahead. But here, there's no contest. Mark Gatiss is diabolical and humorous, and we love him for it. Point goes to Sherlock. Speaking of crime lords, who could forget the Napoleon of crime himself? Professor James Moriarty. Unlike many modern interpretations, Professor James Moriarty was only ever associated in pretty much one Sherlock Holmes story. Conan Doyle basically created Moriarty as the bane of Sherlock and wanted to kind of end the stories on a strong note. So Moriarty was constructed to kill Sherlock during the final problem. In the show, he's played by Andrew Scott, while in the film, he's played by Gerard Harris. As to which is superior really comes down to which you prefer of how they portray Moriarty. These performances are a lot like the Joker. Which do you prefer, the Heath Ledger Joker or the Jack Nicholson Joker? In the first film, we get a feeling of how Moriarty works, even though he isn't the main villain. While in the second film, we get the payoff from this by seeing Sherlock compete against a malevolent version of his own intelligence. In terms of Moriarty's title, the Napoleon of crime, Gerard Harris takes that anytime. In just a few short lines of dialogue, we hear everything we need to know about this guy and how he has managed to build up this criminal empire. And surprisingly, this is how the film differs from the show. In Sherlock, we know ostensibly nothing about Moriarty's character, or how he got into this business, or where he came from, or anything. All we know is that he's in possession of kind of a cybernetic master key, and that he's killed people from a very young age. And I'm sorry to tell you, but that whole cyber master key thing, kind of a letdown in the end. And in a way, the mystery of the character is what draws us to him. Much like Sherlock, Moriarty in this version breaks all societal norms, and instead of being a reserved genius, Moriarty is loud, bombastic, and just unnerving. This guy can drive you nuts and not even have to be there. In fact, the scars that he left on Sherlock's mind in the seasons 1 and 2 were shown in the season 3 finale. But to answer the question of which is best really comes down to this. Andrew Scott can make Sherlock cry. Gerard Harris can make Sherlock bleed. Oh my god. This scene literally made me gasp when I first saw it. This wasn't some professor smiling at Sherlock telling me he was gonna die. This was Moriarty plunging a freaking meat hook into Sherlock's shoulder and lacing his screams with Fischelweiser. This is what drove home that this guy wasn't fucking around. Doing this to such a seemingly indestructible character in my eyes made Sherlock mortal. And if that wasn't enough, just look at how the two act around each other. I know I said how much I loved how over-the-top Andrew Scott was, but the interactions between Robert Downey Jr. and Gerard Harris was just somehow different. The subtle eye and facial movements, the dialogue, the way they moved around each other, it was amazing. It was like seeing gladiators fight with words. And during the climax of the Game of Shadows, it was like watching gods go to war. Okay, sorry for going a bit of a fanboy on you at that point, but definitely point goes to Sherlock Holmes. Hope you still got some energy in you because we're going into the semifinals. This is John Hamish Watson. So again, it's really a testament of which you prefer, John as the everyman or John as the soldier. In Sherlock, he's played by Martin Freeman, and guess what? He plays Martin Freeman. He's the lovable dumb guy. He's the straight wall for Sherlock to bounce off of. In fact, they even mention this.
I'm happy to play the fool for you. I will run along behind you like some half-wit, making you look clever if that's what you need. But
now, let it be known that I love Martin Freeman and have watched a lot of things that he's been in. But the thing is, Martin Freeman does better with drama. Have you ever noticed that in The Hobbit, Hot Fuzz, or Love Actually, every time Martin tries to be funny, it comes off as awkward, but whenever he has to be serious, he does really well at it. And I feel that in the show, the writers try to make Watson funny like Sherlock, not realizing that it doesn't work. Not to mention one of the things that made Watson, well, Watson, was the fact that he's a soldier. And I'm sorry, I just don't see Martin Freeman as a soldier. Now let it be known, I myself am in the military, and I know people like Martin Freeman. But if I were to look at Martin Freeman, the first thing that pops into my head isn't soldier. While in the film, he's played by Jude Law, a man who I could see as a soldier from a mile away. This, plus other facets of the Watson character, makes so much more sense with Jude Law. The idea that he's a man of action trying to walk away from it is very well done. You can tell that he loves his wife and wants to be with her, but the thrill of the chase is still calling him. But what I think really does it for me is his relationship with Sherlock. In the show, John is kind of a business partner slash best friend, while in the film, the dynamic is more like they're siblings. In the show, they always seem so restrained, so emotionally repressed. Oh wait, they're British. While here, they act like most people would act. They're irrational, they bicker, they argue constantly, and guess what? That's what adults do. And while I do like how Martin Freeman just kind of goes along with Sherlock's shenanigans, I never felt like he was learning everything. Yeah, he can do rudimentary deductions, but after being around Sherlock for years on end, you'd think he would have picked up on a few things. In the film, he's more like Sherlock's apprentice. In fact, he's almost as smart as Sherlock. He can deduct, draw conclusions, figure things out for himself. In fact, in the second movie, he practically becomes the hero. It almost felt like Sherlock was secretly leaving a legacy in Watson, like he was the teacher as well as his friend. Anyway, I think I've given enough evidence here to say that Jude Law is the superior Watson. Point, and they didn't have so many goddamn gay jokes. Fucking fangirls ruin everything. Sorry, point goes to Sherlock Holmes. And now on to the big one, the one we've all been waiting for. Who did it better, Sherlock or Sherlock Holmes? it be known that before this film I had never seen Iron Man. And looking back, I will say that Robert Downey Jr.'s performance here does seem a bit like a proto-Tony Sparks. But you know what? I don't care, because everything about this Sherlock is awesome. Not only is it a divergent from the standard Sherlock formula, but it was my first exposure, which blew me away. I thought he was just going to be a standard dry humor Brit, but no, it was completely backwards. Sherlock in this film is a weirdo, he's an eccentric, he is a snooty know-it-all. And beyond that, he's a badass. This guy can fist fight, sharpshoot, all the things that make him exciting to watch. I also liked how they showed how dedicated he was in this version. Especially in the first film, you get a real feeling of just how far he is willing to go to break the case. Sherlock in this version will jump headfirst down the rabbit hole and go to hell and back to figure out the puzzle. Well, how about over in the show? Well, since this was the performance that put Benedict Cumberbatch on the map, you know it's good. While a bit more in the traditional in terms of the character, they make up for it with the setting. Here, Sherlock is also snooty and weird, but it feels a bit more natural. In modern times, people of extreme intellect often find it difficult to exist in the everyday life. Here, Sherlock is more of an introvert, but he also gets bored a lot and turns into a thrill seeker. This works for the character because it shows how much he needs excitement in his life. Not to mention, let's talk about the best part about Benedict Sherlock. His voice.
There's a margin of error, but I'm pretty sure this is 7:47, leaving Heathrow tomorrow at 6:30 in the evening for Baltimore. Apparently it's going to save the world. Not sure how that could be true, but give me a moment. I don't even know the case for 8 seconds.
Oh my freaking god, I love his voice. With Benedict's skill at articulation and speed talking, you get a sense of just how his mind works in this version. It's like a supercomputer filing through data faster than he can process it. I gotta say, I just love how much detail they went into to explore Sherlock Holmes' thought process. The film did it too, with him analyzing the situation with slow motion and voiceover dialogue. But here, we actually get to see inside Sherlock's mind. Literally. This is something that I think the show has over the film, and it's the fact that we get to peel back the layers of intellect and sarcasm and see the man underneath the mask that Sherlock has built up around himself. And that, especially for me, is worth the point. Point goes to Sherlock. Okay, tied again. Let's go to the tiebreaker and find out who did it best. This is Story for the Win. In terms of story, it's hard to compare because none of these stories are the same. The film tackles 2 stories, an original one concerning dark magic and a retelling of the final problem. However, in the show, we get 9 different stories, both originals and retellings, but I think we can compare in terms of overall quality. The film, for instance, is shorter with just 2 productions, which allows you to concentrate on the quality, but you don't get as much of it. The first film was amazing, while the second film was just good. Now, that being said, neither are perfect. They both have their flaws in terms of characters and pacing. Rewatching the films, I forgot how much fucking running there were in these things. For the show, though, quality is all over the place. You start off with a very strong opener, and then go to The Blind Banker, which was kind of shitty, then blow our minds with The Great Game. Season 2, you start another great one with The Scandal in Belgrazia, move into a mid-episode of The Hounds of Baskerville, which was kind of boring, and then you have the sensation of The Fall of the Reichenbach, and then you have all of Season 3. I didn't like much of Season 3. But my deciding factor here is how the mystery is portrayed, which is the whole reason why we're here. The show utilizes the show and tell method of mesmerizing effects. The way these very simple yet very in-depth captions convey so much information is really true to the Sherlock spirit. However, maybe they conveyed a little too much information. Because part of the draw of Sherlock is the surprise at the end. But here, the surprise is usually always either subverted or not carried through all the way. While the film may do less explaining, it did a wonderful job of bombarding the viewer with questions, like the magic that was seemingly popping out of nowhere, but was still possible. And since this was our first film, we didn't know whether or not magic actually existed in this world. And the ending where they said it was all a fake was just masterfully crafted. Similarly, the defeat of Moriarty in the second film felt a bit complete. different, a bit more just. A fitting end to the genius who had finally met his match. The films played it like we were companions of Sherlock, watching him walk around and work it all out while we watched and begged for answers. In terms of entertainment, I prefer the show. In terms of structure, characters, and execution, I have to give it to the film. Sherlock Holmes did it best. So thank you so much for tuning in, and judging by the widening of your pupils and the curvature of your mouth, you've enjoyed this review, and you're going to like it. Thank you very much. However, judging by the tightness in your jaw and the increasing breathing pattern, you disagree with me and will be telling me quite quickly why Sherlock was the superior portrayal. I will enjoy reading it. You, on the other hand, have been looking through the video several times to see what inaccuracies I have and will be pointing them all out in the comments. And you're just wondering what I'm going to be doing next. So I'll tell you and you can make a deduction. Go to the edge, the brink, find the file with the 10th symbol on it, and you will find the truth. This has been Bookmark Theater. I'm your host, Bookmark. Thanks for watching.